Good afternoon. This is Tony Browder. Sorry for the delay coming to you, but thank you for your patience. And we're going to jump right into it. Normally, when I'm doing my show, I do a commentary at the top of each show, but today is going to be a little different. I would like to do a commentary and a public service announcement. 11 days ago, I received a phone call from my family in Chicago that my aunt, my mother's youngest sister, was found dead in her home. My aunt, Sharon Renee Steele, was 18 months younger than me. We lived under the same roof for the first 13 years of her life. So Renee was more like a sister to me than my aunt. We got in trouble together. We beat each other up. We got whippings together. And she is one of the closest members of my family. So to lose her hurts. And as I was just reflecting on the fact that I'll never see her again, I'll never talk to her again, and started to get sad as any person would when they are dealing with the loss, I was reminded of the fact that I had spoken with her 5 days before she passed. I had an opportunity in February to spend a week with her when I was in Las Vegas for a speaking engagement, and we had a chance to reconnect and spend some quality time together. So as I thought about all the good times we had, I was reminded of the fact that all we are memories. We move through life carrying memories in our consciousness of everything that has ever happened to us. And it's those memories that get us through difficult times. It's those memories that help us laugh and enjoy this difficult thing called life. And so as I reflected on my memories with my aunt, it also dawned on me that we have control over what we remember. We have control over the memories that we generate. So I end every show talking about, it's all about love. It's all about learning to love you and learning to love everyone else who is a reflection of you. That's a power that we have. So we have the capacity to create positive memories. So as we reflect the loss of a loved one, it always reminds us that we need to be kinder to each other. We need to be kinder to ourselves. And in the midst of dealing with the loss of my aunt and confronting the fact that we now have to take care of her, we now have to funeralize her, we're dealing with another problem that often comes up, and that is we find out that people have problems, people have secrets that they're too ashamed of to share with others. And those secrets take a psychological and emotional and physical toll on a person. And at the end of the day, all of our secrets come out. So as I've been talking with family over the last 11 days, we've been talking to each other and reminding each other that we have to do better. We have to be more open to each other, more honest with each other. And if we have problems, we need to find someone that we can bring our problems to at least talk about them and get them off of our mind. And maybe have someone in our family, in our circle, who can help us find a solution to the problem. And another important commentary I want to share with you is the importance of having your data, your personal data in one place so that it's accessible to a member of your family, the passwords for your computers, your insurance policies, all the information that a family member would need in a time of grief to settle your affairs. These are things that we can do now. These are things that we must do now in order to make life better for those that we love. So, family, I had a conversation with my cousins last night on a Zoom, and we all talked about what we're going through. We all made a pledge to do better as we honor our Aunt Renee and prepare for her memorial service. And we're going to continue a conversation because we all know that there will be more deaths in the family, but we can learn from the most recent death to prepare for the other deaths that are coming. And we've got to do that for those we love. We've got to do that for ourselves. So let me turn the page and move on to my guest for today. My guest is a dear friend, is a brilliant brother. He's a psychologist. He's an author. He's a presenter. He is one who has been in the struggle for African mental, physical, and financial liberation. My guest today is Dr. Ray Winbush, who holds a Ph.D. in psychology from the University of Chicago, my hometown. He's taught at Oakwood, he's taught at Fisk, Alabama A&M, Vanderbilt, and he currently is on staff at Morgan State University. Ray Winbush is the author of three books: The Warrior Method, Should America Pay? Slavery and the Raging Debate and Reparations, and Belinda's Petition, A Concise History of Reparations for the Transatlantic Slave Trade. He is the editor, along with Denise Wright, of the Osiris Papers, Reflections on the Life and Writings of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. So Ray, welcome to the Browder File. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing fine, Tony. It's good to see you, bro. Good
Likewise,
to see you.
likewise. So man, look, let's just jump into it. And the first question I have for you is, what is it with people in general, Black people in particular, withholding information, holding secrets, and feeling shame about certain things? What does that stem from, and how can we deal with that issue?
You know, we have, I mean, the whole history of, Africans in America is that we were separated at a lot of different levels, psychologically, physically, with regards to our family. And there's things that occurred during those times that continue, in fact, that make us feel like I can't tell the rest of the family this because they will judge me. A lot of that stuff comes from us being fearful in many cases, not all cases, of course, when we were enslaved. And so part of that comes from this deep feeling that somehow I'm not as good as so and so if I share the secret about how I messed up,
Mhm.
that I spent too much money. Um, I have bills that I don't know how to pay right now. All of that stuff, and what we've got to do, and we'll hold back on even physical ailments. I
Yes.
was listening to you while you were talking about your aunt, who sounds like you, as you said, your sister. I lost my sister back in November of last
Mm,
year, and
okay. Sorry for your loss.
I did not know until she was in her 80s that she was diabetic.
Mhm.
And we were close. And
Yes.
and I said, her name was Levon. I said, Levon, why didn't you tell me? She said, well, I just didn't want anybody to think bad of me, that I had eaten the wrong foods or whatever. And I said, sweetie, you don't have to work. So then by then, she had kidney disease, and she,
Hmm.
made her transition on that. And so I've seen it on a personal level in the past few months about hiding secrets about health, about
Yes.
finance, what we just feel in general about the world around us, and we've got to do better than that. We do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, listen, man, you are a psychologist and you're part of a family of psychologists that I've known and have come to love for over 4 decades, man. What prompted you to become a psychologist?
Well, it's funny, back in the 60s, I was at Oakwood University now, in Huntsville, Alabama. And when I went to Oakwood from high school, I said I was going to become an historian. I mean, I was telling people I'm going to be a historian. And after I took a course from who I consider my first main mentor, Earl Gooding,
Mm,
I took a psychology class from him, and he just inspired me. And I remember him saying in class, he said, we really need to understand how we think, talking about Black folk, but how they think and their mentality towards us and our mentality towards them. And it prompted me to pursue a degree in psychology. It was just that simple.
Well, Ray, I got to tell you, man, that some of my favorite historians are, um, are psychologists. A.C.
Mm.
Hilliard, Naeem Akbar, Wade Nobles,
Wade
you,
Nobles,
all
right.
right? You. So, there is something about people who study the mind, who bring that intense examination of human nature to an interpretation of history,
Exactly.
and you've done that through your works, man. So, I applaud you for taking your psychological skills and applying them in a broader area so that you could be of greater service to your people, man. You've done an excellent job throughout your career.
Well, one thing, one of my teachers at University of Chicago was John O. Franklin, and he was an historian. And I
Hmm.
took a class from him. We became friends. I mean, worked on a bunch of projects together until his transition a few years ago. And Dr. Frank, I still call him Dr. Franklin. He wanted us to call him John. I could never do that. And one of the things Dr. Franklin told us, he said, no matter what subject you take or major in, profess, whatever, he said, always study history.
Mm,
And right now, even though I am a psychologist, I put more work into history sometimes than I do psychology. Um, History, as Malcolm said, is our best teacher. And
absolutely.
and we can't get a better teacher than history. So it's always been a love of mine, history, and even though I am a psychologist.
Hmm. Well, when you were at the University of Chicago, did you know Bobby Wright during your tenure
Oh,
at Chicago?
look, if it wasn't for Bobby, I wouldn't have passed the second semester statistics, okay, or quarter system that they had at that time.
Right.
Bobby was so far ahead of him.
Absolutely.
I mean, I remember it, and I can remember in 1971, he said, Ray, by the year 2000, which then sounded real far away, he said people are going to be holding computers in their hands.
Mm,
And Tony, this was the time of IBM 360s where computers occupied entire rooms and stuff
yes.
like that.
Hmm.
Uh, and I said, Bobby, what are you talking about? He said, I'm telling you, man, he said, computers are going to be usable by everybody. He was a master statistician
Mm,
and had a degree in computer science. And this again was in the early 1970s.
okay.
So
Okay.
Bobby was a major influence on me, major
Yeah.
influence.
Bobby worked on the West Side,
Yeah,
where I lived, right?
right.
And I didn't discover him until after he died, until I left
Okay.
Chicago in 71. And once I started hanging out with psychologists here in DC, um, um, a buddy of mine had a copy of his book Menticide, right?
Oh,
And I
yeah.
started reading that and realized this brother lived, I mean, he worked right around the corner from my house, right?
That's right.
So
That's
you
right.
never know who's in your own backyard, man.
Absolutely. And now it used to be called Garfield Park Community Mental Health Center, but they
Yep.
changed the name
Hmm.
because of Bobby's influence
Yep.
on the West Side.
Yep. 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 And I had a brother, it's a good friend of mine, who worked at that facility. And so he brought me in to speak several times. And it was so funny coming back to Chicago, going to that going to that facility on the corner of Kesey and Madison.
That's
I
right.
remember as a kid, there was a bank there. My dad opened up my first bank account in that very same building, man. So
That's
there's
something.
so much, man. There's so much history. But look, man, I listen to you quite frequently when you're the guest on the Carl Nelson show. And I remember about a year ago, you had gone back to University of Chicago for some sort of reunion,
Yeah.
and you made reference to a man who I had never heard of before, Ernest Burgess, who's considered to be the father of sociology.
Yeah.
Tell us about Ernest Burgess.
When I was at Chicago, I was there with Milton Friedman, the
Mm,
conservative economist, was there,
mhm,
Saul Bellow, John Hope Franklin, of course, and Bruno Bettelheim. It was in that era. Burgess was viewed almost, I had a minor in sociology. He was viewed almost as a god at
mm,
Chicago, the father of sociology. He published his book, which was published in 1920, I think 21 or 22, is still being read as the
mm.
best book on sociology, the foundations of it. Um, his big contribution to urban understanding was that he viewed things in concentric circles. And I
Yeah.
wish I had a a board up here. I could show it, but
No. You look. You mentioned that during your interview, and I went
yeah,
online and pulled it up and saw these
okay.
concentric circles. So he literally created the blueprint for the ghetto.
He did. He
Yeah.
did. And he called the downtown area. Then
Mm-hmm.
immediately on the next circle was the CBD or Central Business District.
Mm-hmm.
Then he talked about poor people,
Mm-hmm.
ghetto. And he actually had one of his original charts had ghetto written on it.
Yep.
And he defined that as a crime-laden area. I mean, a lot of this stuff was just, downright racist. I mean, he since has been critiqued by a lot of people and criticized by others. But see, I always rejected the notion that he was the father of sociology.
Why is that?
Well, because of Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. And Du Bois in 1896 did the classic study of urban life called The Philadelphia Negro. You can still buy that book. If you read that book, you would say, this is sociology.
Mm.
I know that Burgess must have known about him. I know he must have about him. And I think that he assumed the title of father of sociology because he was white. It was just that
Yes.
simple.
Yeah.
He collaborated with a guy named Park. In fact, when I was teaching at Fisk, the building, one of the major classroom buildings at Fisk is the Park Johnson building. I actually taught classes there. And Johnson, of course, was Charles Johnson, the first Black president of Fisk University. And Park and Burgess both taught at Black institutions.
Really?
Booker T. Washington called Burgess up and said, can you come down to teach at Tuskegee? And he did a stint at Tuskegee.
Huh.
Park was at Fisk. Burgess came to Fisk for several lectures. So they were very much interested in what they call the urban Negro
Mm-hmm.
and did a lot of work on that. But I always felt, and by the fact that Park and Burgess were affiliated with Fisk, they had to have known about Du Bois's work. There's no
Sure. Sure.
doubt
Sure.
about it.
Sure. Well, it's interesting when you think about the process of sociology, people who study systems of socializing people and determining the mindset or specific mindsets that will endure for generations. So the mere fact that these men worked at HBCUs, they were studying Black folk. They were
Oh yeah,
perfecting the plan to ensure that we will always remain ghettoized
that's right.
physically, if not mentally. So
Exactly.
it's no accident. I don't believe in coincidences, you know?
No, I totally agree with that. And I think that we always have to, Bobby Wright used to say, since you mentioned him, he used to say, we have Black studies and then we have studies of Black people. And
Mm,
most of those studies of Black people are done by white people. And there's a whole body of knowledge. One of the famous studies in psychology is called the Mark of Oppression by Gardner and Ovisi in the early 1950s, where they just said that, Black people were basically almost cursed, with the mark of oppression. And they
mm,
elaborated on that. You remember the book Black Rage,
yes.
and that was done by two brothers who
Hmm.
were psychiatrists, but they kind of bought into some of that stuff that we were angry all the time simply because of the mark of oppression that they
Mm.
quoted extensively. So you know I- you
So
know
wait, let me ask you a question on that issue specifically. Isn't that a problem that you're confronted with when Black people go to white institutions to be educated and they learn white history and culture, they learn to think like white, and they become better at oppressing Black people than white people are sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. We know again, what did Bobby used to say? He used to say, a white institution will train you, a Black institution will educate you. And there's
Mm,
a difference between I can train a dog or a seal. We
absolutely.
are trained, and I taught at Vanderbilt. I went to school at University of Chicago, but my foundation, K through 12, was a Black school in Cleveland, or black schools in Cleveland, and then going to Oakwood, which was an HBCU. I sent my children to HBCUs because I wanted them to be educated rather than trained.
Sure, sure. So look, there's another book that a psychologist friend of mine here in DC used to always carry. This was back in the late 80s, early 90s. Every time I saw this brother, he carried this book. Book was titled Even the Rat Was White. Unpack that book for my listeners. And let me just share our listeners. You're listening to the Browder File Show. I'm Tony Browder. My guest today is Ray Winbush, who's a psychologist. And in a little while, we're going to talk about his burgeoning career as a film consultant. But let's deal with your role as a psychologist right now. Even the Rat Was White. What's that about?
It's a powerful book. Robert Guthrie, rest his soul, was a good friend of mine, lived in San Diego.
Mm,
And he called me up one day, he said, Ray, I'm tired. I'm just tired of us hearing about G. Stanley Hall, all these white psychologists that created the foundations of American psychology. And he said, I'm writing a book. And he did, and went through two editions. I used it in my class today. It was called Even the Rat Was White. And what it is a Black history of psychology. And he
mm,
points to the racism that these so-called founding racists like Lewis Terman, who's authored the Stanford Binet Intelligence Test,
mm.
which is the most widely used in so-called intelligence test.
Sure.
And psychology has contributed so much to the racism and these ideas of inferiority of Black people and the superiority of white people, both of being myths. So, Guthrie was a brilliant scholar. He made his transition all too early. And we were good friends. I remember we were at a conference at a hotel, Pascal's Hotel in
Oh, yeah, in Atlanta.
Atlanta.
Absolutely. Hmm.
Everybody would gather there. Bobby Wright, Wade Knowles, Naeem, all of us would be there. And Guthrie said, I never will forget that I had written a book then, and we were in a room because he had just done Even the Rat Was White. And we were asking him questions, and somebody said, Dr. Guthrie, you have a book, and I forget what they asked him. He said, well, which book are you talking about? And when he said, which book are you talking about? I said, God, this guy's written more than one book. And I was determined in my life that I was going to write at least two books, because of what Guthrie said in that room that night. So, again, a brilliant scholar, very approachable,
Hmm.
was just that book. If you don't read any other book about psychology, read Even the Rat Was White.
Okay. Well, thinking of psychologists who have written very important books, I neglected to reference earlier in my roll call of great psychologists who were historians, the great Amos Wilson.
Oh my God. I
Yeah,
mean, where do you begin with Amos?
sure.
I mean, there's so much that you can say. It's like Toni Morrison said. There's so many things to think about. She said this woman, but this man. Amos. He broadened our view of psychology because he applied it to economics.
Yes,
His blueprint for Black Power, as thick as that book is, should be read by everybody.
absolutely.
And he applied his psychology to so many things. I think most Black psychologists do that in the first place because we don't have time to be sitting around in laboratories, you know, theorizing about stuff. We have to apply our stuff in
Absolutely.
real world for our people.
Absolutely. Well, one of your books, you've written several books. I believe your first book was called The Warrior Method,
Yeah,
a program for rearing healthy Black boys.
yeah.
What's that book about?
Well, real quick, I was tired in the '90s, Tony. When we were named, Black men were named an endangered species.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to myself, I
Yeah.
was so tired of hearing that. Coming from on high, the Clintons were talking about super predators and stuff
Yes.
like that. And so I asked myself one day, I was at Fisk at that time, and I said, well, if a species is endangered, somebody's endangering them.
Mm.
You know,
Hmm.
tigers don't get up in the morning and say, we're endangered, you know. So I wanted to point the finger at who was endangering us. And so I wrote that book while I was in Ghana. I did the research on what is, you know, called plural society. It's the coming of age,
Mm.
uh, you know,
The rites of
classroom.
passage.
It's a rites of passage
Yes.
program for women or girls. They have Sandy Society, and I talked to several griots about it in West. It's all over West Africa. It's
Hmm.
not confined to Ghana, and all the warrior method is an extension of plural society through the entire life cycle. And I just started, and it hasn't been and I'm not exaggerating, it hasn't been a week past that I don't get somebody who has emailed me. I got letters from guys in Iraq during the Iraq War,
Mm.
you know, asking about the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do recall you saying in a lecture quite a while ago that you received a letter, email, a request from Jada Pinkett Smith about that book. Tell our listeners, and let me remind my listeners, you're listening to Dr. Ray Winbush, profound local psychologist who is fighting for African people all over the world. And he's talking about psychology. He's talking about life. He's talking about health. And right now, he's going to talk about the Warrior Method, a program for rearing healthy Black boys. So Jada Pinkett Smith called you up one day and said she liked your book, huh?
Well, it was what happened. I was teaching a class at Morgan, and Karen Banfield Evans was in the class. I did not know that Karen was Jada's aunt. You
Mm,
know, so I was using my book in the class. She gave a copy to Jada and Will. Long story short, I was on a book tour with Should America Pay, my second book. Came back and there was an envelope on my desk, and it said from the Will and Jada Pinkett Smith Foundation. Opened it up, and I had never met either one of them at all. And it said, "Thank you for your book. We're using this as early education for our children. And just to show you a token of our appreciation, there's a check here for $50,000." And I opened it, and we funded the Warrior Institute with
mm,
that. And I've literally just taught the method all over the world. I
mm,
mean, Australia, Europe, just every place.
beautiful story. I understand, based on the interview you did, 'cause I've been following you for a long time, brother. You've done good
And
work.
me likewise, yeah.
You received a phone call and an invitation to come to Chicago to meet with Ryan Coogler and his wife, and they
Yeah.
had a proposal for you. Tell our listeners about that proposal.
Well, two of my students from Vanderbilt have really made headlines. One was Charles King,
Mm.
the biggest Black producer in Hollywood, bigger than Tyler Perry. He did
Mm.
the film Thurgood, several films, Mudbound.
Didn't he do One Night in Miami? Did he have something to do with
He
that film?
had something, I think his studio did, yes,
Okay.
Malco. And so Charles was my student at Vanderbilt, and Charles was kind of nerdy. And long story short, he asked me one day, he said, "Man, Ray, if you could do something other than what you did in psychology, what would you have become?" And I just kind of blurted out, I would be a film producer. I would
Mm.
make films because you can educate masses of Black people with film.
Sure.
He said, "Man, that's what I'm gonna do when I grow up." But he was real nerdy like. This dude right now, somebody told me he's worth over $80 million now. Uh, him and Michelle Alexander that wrote The New Jim Crow were both my students. I'm proud of both of them.
Mm.
Anyway, I, one night I'm at home, phone rings late. On the phone, guy said, "Man, I speak to Ray Winbush." I said, he said, "This is Ryan Coogler." You know, as of well, only Ryan Coogler I know is the guy that did Black Panther because it was during the same time. And then he
Mhm.
said, "That's who this is." And I said, "Who is it?" Because I thought it was a student at Oregon playing a joke on it, but it really was him. He told me something. His first line was that he wanted to make a film about a real Black Panther. And he knew he had done some background on me. I guess he knew that I was in Chicago 6 months after Fred Hampton was assassinated by the FBI in
Hmm.
Chicago. What's his name? Edward Hanrahan.
Edward Hanrahan, State's
Remember
Attorney
him?
Edward
Yes.
V. Hanrahan.
That's right. But both criminals, or So long story short, I met with him and Kinsey. That's his wife, and I was glad to see on Sinners that she is producing with him right now.
Yes.
Right now, and we had dinner. He asked me would I help out with the research with Judas and the Black Messiah, and I
Hmm.
said, man, as long as it's going to be accurate about Fred Hampton. And he said, man, it's got to be accurate. And it is. I mean,
Hmm.
the only thing we changed the name of the Black Keystone Nation. I
Yeah.
forget what we called them in the movie, but it was very, very accurate. And I did an interview with Father, what's the Catholic priest that adopted children in
I know you. I
Chicago?
can't. Clemens,
I met
Father
with him
Clemens.
because
Hmm.
he had done the eulogy for Fred Hampton. And
Okay.
I met with him. He was very gracious. And I just did the research for the film. You
Sure.
know,
Sure.
that was it.
You mentioned the murder of Fred Hampton. I grew up on the West Side,
Yeah,
and I know where the Black Panther headquarters was that was shot up in the film.
that's
I
right.
know where the house was when Fred Hampton was killed. Matter of fact, I was a freshman at the University of Illinois at
Wow.
that time in Chicago. And there was a sister who was part of our freshman class who was in the house the night that Fred Hampton was killed. And
Wow.
she's the person who Edward V. Hanrahan, Richard Daley, and other
J. Edgar
officials
Hoover.
claim, J. Edgar
Right.
Hoover, but she was the person that they claim had a sawed-off shotgun and fired it point blank at these officers in the hallway. She gave us her version of the story. Now, this is December 1969. She gave us her version of the story. And then I contrasted what she told us in a small setting in the punch out in the cafeteria. I contrasted that with what I heard on the news and Channel 4 News, what I read in the Sun Times and the Daily Tribune. And that's when my eyes were open and I realized
Yeah.
that the media lies, that politicians lie, right?
Almost everything that Hanrahan and
Yes.
Hoover produced about that was nothing but lies. It was
Yeah.
just all lies.
Hmm.
I mean, Mark Clark, first of all, Fred Hampton, even when they shot, he was still alive. And
Hmm.
Mark Clark, they went in there and shot him in the head.
Yep.
And I mean, Chairman Fred would have had united many coalitions that were fighting each other, the gangs that were there and other things like that. He had made this coalition and he became a threat,
Yep.
one of
Absolutely.
our great leaders. And I was
Absolutely.
glad that Kugler had done the movie about it.
I was out in California last month and watched that film again on the flight back. And
Yeah,
coming from Chicago, and I was what 18 years old in 1969. So I remember that history. I remember
sure.
what was happening in Chicago. Remember what was happening in the world at that time. And the movie just touched me on such a deep level. And I was so pleased that Ryan Coogler and his wife Zinzi had the consciousness to
That's right.
produce that film and that they brought in somebody like yourself to make sure that they had it right. Now, I heard you on an interview talk about the FBI informant William O'Neill, Wild Bill O'Neill, and I'd like for you to verify and or clarify the circumstances under which O'Neill supposedly committed suicide. Can you talk about the story?
Yeah, I can. First of all, there's a lot of people, including Father Clements, who, let me put it this way, they're not sure that O'Neill
Is
did
dead.
commit suicide. The
Mhm.
same morning that he supposedly ran out on the Eisenhower, which is a major expressway joining, the west, going through the west side,
Hmm.
another black man committed suicide by running out into the street. So, and then the other thing, and you can talk to Fred Hampton Jr. about this, but Fred's mother said that when he was supposedly going to, or had a funeral for William O'Neill, she said she was going to go over there to the funeral home and spit on him.
Mm-hmm.
She said when the coffin was open, she went there. She said it wasn't him in the coffin.
Yeah.
And a lot of people feel that after he did his dirty work of selling Chairman Fred for $600, that they put him in a WITPRO,
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
witness protection program. And there's some people in Chicago now. I have a cousin in Chicago, and he told me, he said, man, a lot of people think he's still alive. We don't
Sure.
know where he is, but we think he may be still alive.
Mm-hmm. And I recall in the film, after he had given Fred the drug that
Mhm.
rendered him unconscious, so
Yes,
the police can come in and kill him in his bed, he was given some money and the keys to a gas station in Maywood, Illinois. And I got
that's
family who
right.
lives in Maywood,
Mhm.
and I've seen that gas station.
Is
So,
that right?
that was his reward for betraying black people. And you're probably right in terms of he was given another assignment in another city to continue
Right.
doing his dirty work.
You're absolutely right. And the strange thing, when I was doing, I don't know if you ever heard of the Red File. It's in the Chicago Historical Society.
No.
I, man, it's on the north side, and I was doing the research for the film, and this white woman came up to me and said, "Have you ever?" She knew what I was doing. She said, "Have you ever heard of the Red File?" She whispered it. I said,
Mm,
"No." She pulled out. It was just a regular, file cabinet, but it was full of how people were spied on in Chicago during that era. And the thing about it is that I went through that file. I could not find one thing on Fred Hampton.
mm.
I'm sorry, on William O'Neill. We went to his high school, which was in Maywood.
Okay.
No transcript. It was like he was totally
Yep.
erased.
Hmm.
And I think the FBI did it.
Of course, it makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense.
It does. It does.
So, given the oppression that we deal with, and you spend a lot of time during the time when you were at Fisk, you held these seminars on racism and white supremacy. You would bring Dr. Welsing and Mr. Fuller
Yeah.
down regularly, being that we were the constant subject and object of oppression and racism. How do we deal with it? And how do we turn the corner, brother?
Boy, that's the question among African psychologists. Um, Anybody who says that the system of white supremacy has not been effective on Black people, simply don't understand the history of white supremacy. Has it been successful in undermining many of us, messing our heads up, creating images that are detrimental to our young people? Absolutely. How you overcome it, a lot of what you have to do. And I use this analogy a lot, but just like we inoculate our kids
Mm.
against rubella, whooping cough,
Measles.
measles, small,
Yes.
even though this idiot in the, well,
Hmm.
I'm not going straight
Thank
topic.
you. Thank you.
Okay. We need to give our children a cultural inoculation from before they're even born.
Hmm.
Instead of playing, like I read this article about you should play Mozart. Ain't nothing wrong with Mozart. I listen to the dude, but why not play John Coltrane?
Right.
A Love Supreme,
Some Earth, Wind, and
while
Fire, right?
Earth, Wind, and Fire in the womb.
Sun Ra. Yes.
Right. And then when
Hmm.
they come out, surround the cribs, the bedrooms with images of Black folk.
Hmm.
I've done it with my children, and they grew up okay.
Sure.
So I think that what we've got to do, we've got to give our children an early inoculation. We can't wait till they get to college, or even for that matter, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. We
Hmm.
have to give them a cultural inoculation that continues throughout their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Give them the foundation
That's
that will
right.
allow them to become comfortable
That's
embracing their
right.
blackness, right?
Exactly.
Embracing Black culture and Black people. Um, One book that you were the editor of, along with Denise Wright, a book that I was proud to contribute an essay in, honored our dear friend, our dear sister, Dr. Frances Cress
Yes.
Wilson, the Osiris Papers. Tell us about that process, why you did it, and what your goals were.
Well, I mean, primarily, I mean, Francis and I were close friends. And, Francis used to call me up and say, Ray, I got to revise ISIS papers because some of the things I wrote, they're no longer, applicable. Like she says in the ISIS papers, Nelson and Winnie Mandela, most powerful couple
Mm.
in the world. At the time, they were. We
Sure.
know that they were divorced. Doesn't mean that they still weren't powerful, but she wanted to. She never did that, and that the best. I felt that the best way of remembering her was to put her, and people who knew her, like yourself, and Chuck D, Jeremiah Wright, and others, put them in a book so that people could study the book, uh, that they could read more about her. I'm really thankful that a lot of people, when I do give a public lecture, say, "Well, I got your book, Osiris Papers, and I'm reading it now. It's a little bit hard, Doc, but I'm reading it." And we
Mhm.
should study her life because, as I say in the introduction to that book, there's very few people that have done uh, comprehensive views and provided a theoretical basis for white supremacy. I can think of Wabogo maybe, with Cold Wind from the North,
Mhm.
uh, Michael Bradley,
Yes. Iceman
Iceman
Inheritance, right?
Inheritance,
Yes.
all of that. But it's very few theories, and I think that Francis's theory is the most comprehensive based on what the work that Neely Fuller has done.
Hmm. Okay. In the little bit of time that we have left, I want you to talk about your work with reparations. What prompted you to do that work? Where are we now, and where are we going?
Well, that's a whole show.
Okay, well, we'll bring you back and discuss it, of course.
Well, back in the 90s, I was at Fisk and I heard a speech by Queen Mother Moore, and she
Mm,
said, sometimes one sentence can change your mind about a lot of things. Um, there's a white psychologist called Denver. He calls these moments pacers. And she said something very simple. She said, everything that Black people have done in this country and around the world is to try to repair the damage that white people caused them. And I said, that's true. And then I started thinking about, you know, enslavement rebellions. I
hmm.
started thinking about Nat Turner and with Harriet Tubman. They were all trying to repair this damage. King, Malcolm, all of them. So I started devoting a lot of energy on reparations, to repair the damage, that has been meted upon us, and not only in this country, but around the world.
Absolutely.
And in my travels around the world, the only thing that I don't care, I've heard it in Australia, throughout the continent, people said they owe us. They owe us. And we know that. And the issue is, how do we get it? And we've got to do some strong work in getting it. And that's what I've been engaged with. Very quickly, the state of reparations now is interesting. Mark Thompson and I we had a interesting conversation a couple nights ago within Cobra, National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. And reparations weren't really challenged, organizationally until 2016. All of
Mm,
these groups, like the Foundational Black Americans, Tariq Nasheed's group, Yvette Carnell's group, ADOS, American Descendants of Slaves. I always tell people to spell the word backwards, but that's another discussion. And the Freedmen,
uh-huh.
all of these groups. Obata Shaka, you know who Obata is out in
Oh
California.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that did the stuff about Black families. He
Hmm.
said something to me just a few months ago. He said, Ray, all of those groups are the only groups in American history as an organization have organized against another Black group.
Mm,
I mean, think about, we've always had our Uncle Toms, you know,
sure.
but we have never had a group that is
Mm,
organized to oppose another Black group. It kind of reminds me in South Africa about the Inkatha Freedom Party with Gatsa Buthelezi,
mm-hmm.
organizing against the ANC with Oliver
Sure.
Tambo and others. So, you know, so after 2016, you see all these groups opposing the work.
Yeah.
It's popping up, and they're getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
And they're getting
Absolutely.
paid by white conservatives, and they're
Absolutely.
getting paid a lot of money too.
Yeah. Well, look, we only have a few minutes left, and I definitely want to take you up on the offer to have you back to talk about reparations and talk about psychology and just talk, period, because it's
Anytime,
been a
man.
joy, brother. You mentioned uh, as in the early stages of you formulating your understanding about reparations, you heard many people say they owe us, they owe us. Let me ask you this as a parting question. What do we owe ourselves? As a psychologist, what do we owe ourselves?
We owe ourselves to, we are, and I say that we are the people, the voices that we should be of our ancestors.
Yes.
You know, our ancestors, every time I hear that spiritual, and I don't go to church, but every time I hear that spiritual that says, just above my head, I hear angels, there must
Mm,
be a God somewhere. I always have this imagination of a sister picking cotton in Mississippi, maybe in 1830. And she looked down through time and saw a Tony Browder
mm,
and a Wade Nobles and a Sister Soldier and you know, and a Harriet Tubman even at that time. And I think that what we've got to do, our voices, their voices have to be heard through us. And I think what we owe us is tribute to our ancestors.
hmm.
We got to continue the struggle that they allowed us to have,
Yes.
and we just got to continue it.
Well, let's, I just read an article this weekend, a scientific article that was written, I think, in January of last year, that specifically speaks to that issue that scientists have found genes within the body that are genes of your ancestors. They said that in so many words. I'm going to send you a copy of that article, man. It,
I
it,
want to
it
read that,
validated
brother.
it validated something I heard Richard King say
Yes,
in 1989 when we sponsored the third annual Melanin Conference at
Melon.
Howard University. And I heard Richard, who's a psychiatrist, say that we know about cloning and how someone could take one gene and within your gene is all the data to make another you. He said, but what psychologists don't talk about, what scientists don't talk about, is that also within your genes, within your DNA, are the memories of all of your ancestors,
I
right?
mean, it's a humbling thought, Tony. I mean, uh, I love the work that you do on your tours of Washington D.C. And whenever, like I've told people about you, I said the brother's doing ancestral work,
Absolutely.
and we've got to do ancestral work, and those genetic things that come through us sometime. And we know it. I mean, Black folk will say things
Hmm.
like, you know, I got a feeling. And
Hmm.
it's
Oh, a little
more than
birdie
just,
told me. That's what my
that's
grandmother
right.
used to say. A little
Yeah,
birdie
little
told me.
birdie told me, you
Hmm.
know, and I think those are the ancestors speaking through us.
Absolutely.
I really believe that. I think they speak to our children at young ages,
Yes.
and they speak to our elders in latter part of our life. But we need to listen, learn to listen to that.
Right. Well, I coined a phrase a couple of years ago that identifies that process. I refer to it as ancestral intelligence.
Oh,
To
that's
know that
beautiful.
we are the vessels through which our ancestors worked through, and to open yourselves up to receive them. And
That's right.
that's the point that was so beautifully presented in Ryan Coogler's latest film, Sinners,
Oh,
when
you.
Sammy is playing that instrument in the juke joint and calls down the ancestors.
That's right.
He invites them into his life, right? So you
I
got to
know.
invite your ancestors, man,
That's
into
right.
your life.
And a lot of us ain't doing that. But you know, we should have, you know, a altar in our home with our
Absolutely.
ancestors on it. We should.
Absolutely. Well, look, man, we got to go. We got to go. But
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to have you back. Thank you so much, Ray, for taking the time out of your day to spend with us. You've dropped a lot of useful information, and I hope people listen to this program multiple times. Write down the names of the books that you reference. Write down and secure copies of your books. Go to Sankofa to buy your Black books. Buy them from Nati in Baltimore. Support
That's
Black
right.
businesses as we educate ourselves. Build a library and
That's
teach
right.
your children the power of reading. You also say, Ray, you should read what, at least 10 minutes a day, everybody?
30 minutes. 30
30
minutes.
minutes a day. Yeah,
That's
that's your
right.
mantra. Read,
It
everybody
is.
should read at least 30 minutes, even if it's the funny papers.
And read about Black folk for 30 minutes a day.
Yeah,
Just anything about, there ain't no more Jet magazine, but read something about Black folk 30
I hear
minutes
you.
a day.
All right. Well, look, man,
Okay.
we got to go. Thank
Okay.
you. We'll have you back. And to my listeners, um, I love you. To my auntie Renee, I love you more. To my families, my cousins, my aunties, I love you all to life. And we will get through this, and we're going to do better for the benefit of our cousins, our children, and our grandchildren who are watching us. So we're not going to be here forever, but as long as we're here, let us remember that this life that we're living is all about love. Learning to love yourself, learning to love everybody who looks like you, and amplify that love everywhere you go so that you become a beacon, you become a messenger, you become the prototype for what life and love looks like. So Khalil, thank you so much, brother, for being patient and getting us on the air today. Take us out with Maurice White as we listen to him remind us of what life is all about and live life to the fullest. This is Tony Browder, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.